So in what is probably record time for us, we managed to charge through the second season of Stranger Things, and I'm still recovering.
Yeah, look, that was way too fast.
Way too fast
Had to smash it, it was...
But we wanted to get this review up, and look, let's put it this way, season 2 was bitchin'. I used a quote from the show! Now, while we did take notes, because of the speed that we watched the show at, this review is going to kind of be a little bit scattered. We're going to go from idea to idea to idea without much flow. I think we're just going to kind of bring up stuff as it occurs to us. Our season 1 review is available for more of an in-depth look about the stuff that already worked. We don't want to really retread stuff in season 1. If it's new content we want to cover here, because this season is much different to the first. So there's a lot of different stuff we want to focus on.
And this was an electrifying season of TV. We did really, really enjoy it, but at the same time, we're still going to critique it as well because, you know, you can't deny when you see problems, and it's good to talk about them as well because, you know, it's good to get people thinking about things that aren't always perfect.
And it's good to open a discussion on things when they're a problem, because once we get talking, it starts to like iron out that type of thing. If everyone online is saying, hey, this didn't work, this did work, it helps the creators kind of know what to do in future seasons, because we've already seen from season 1, the Duffer Brothers and the rest of the team do take on criticism and do evolve from there. So it's important to kind of discuss, and I think a lot of the stuff we're going to bring up is kind of consensus stuff. A lot of people are going to agree with the things that we kind of took issue with. And of course, we are going to be talking full spoilers. So obviously, if you haven't watched the show, I guess you should be watching it because it's kind of a pop culture phenomenon that's definitely worth your time. But we're going to dive straight into spoilers. Here we go. First thing I want to start with discussing is the fact that they outright just called the season Stranger Things 2, and I think that's a really important detail here because this doesn't feel like a second season. It feels like a sequel. Like it's almost like if we're looking at it in terms of like films, we've got like a film. And then we've got the sequel. Like, that's what happened with season 1 and season 2. It doesn't really feel like events kind of flowed on in a season by season way, and other types of shows like you get with Game of Thrones, for instance, or The Walking Dead, it feels like everything's a continuous flow. This was like story 1, story 2, and then we're gonna go 3, 4, 5, whatever.
Yeah, most definitely. And you really do need the knowledge from season 1 to come to Stranger Things 2 as well. Because especially in that first episode, because that first episode was world class. I absolutely loved it. And kind of the way it just jumped into each character with our kind of preconceived knowledge of them and where they were at. And I found that really interesting because it just kind of allowed them to toy with us emotionally and be like, okay, this character's here, you know where they're up to and stuff, and now we're just going to do this with them and that with them. And, you know, without that season 1 behind them, they wouldn't have been able to do that. And I just love that.
We'll dive into the characters first because for anyone who's watched our season 1 review, you know that the characters to us are the best part of this show, and obviously the writing is part of why they're so well characterized, and the acting as well, of course. But this season, while I do think a lot of characters were kind of trapped in limbo, because what we had, I think, was Will's story. Obviously, Will was sidelined in the first episode, the first season, because he was missing the entire time. Season 2 was like, bang, we're going to lock in on Will. I think everyone else is kind of built around him, and that kind of has pros and cons to it, whereas the first season was like everyone interweaved in a way that added up to one whole, whereas I feel like everyone was on different paths here that kind of brought them out so that they could converge at the end. That aside, I do think all the actual character work in this season was still excellent. While there was some inconsistencies with certain people, particularly 11, we will talk about episode 7 in depth down the track, but I do think that the character work was still excellent, and this show constantly finds ways to get the cliches of 80s type characters to evolve and grow.
And so this season we got the absolutely fantastic love triangle between Steve, Nancy and Jonathan, and that was absolutely fantastic. Loved every single second of it because you're loving every single character. You know where they're at emotionally, and we got some beautiful scenes with all of these characters alone at times as well this season. In particular, what I remember, Nancy in, I believe it was the first episode or the second episode, where she went off into the bathroom of Barb's house and she was crying alone. Yeah. And I really felt that. Also, the episode where Jonathan let his, when he let Will run off with his friends, and he sat there in his car and he's like, I've got no friends. Yeah. And I was like, I'm feeling for you, buddy, I'm feeling for you. And then, of course, Steve.
Steve is just the highlight of this season. We're just gonna jump straight in there and say that Steve, basically, I saw a tweet describing him as a soccer mum with 5 kids by the end of the season. That's pretty much what happens. And the thing is about Steve is, like, he's clearly, I think, the funniest character of the season. I think the most kind of comedy comes from him. Obviously, Dustin as well, who we'll get to down the track. But a lot of comedy comes from Steve's character. And what I've got to say is that in a day and age where so many kind of characters have like undercut themselves to make a joke. The writers undercut character development to make a joke. What was funny was Steve's growth, and it felt natural. Like, that was the funny part. It wasn't him doing funny stuff aside from him slowly evolving into this pretty much like a soccer mum. He actually like was part of his progression was just entertaining to watch, because it logically felt like this guy, as with all characters in this show, are just good people trying to do the right thing. So watching him slowly kind of find where he fits into the story like that was the most probably entertaining part of this season, and the thing that definitely worked the best.
I will say, however, though, what I did find is because we kind of honed in on those three at the school, I found we kind of eliminated ourselves from like the other distant or side characters in the show that were at the school with them. I know this is a very large show and they cover a lot of ground with a lot of different characters, but I really did kind of want to see them more at school. I kind of wanted to see the other characters that Nancy and Jonathan were interacting with and how that might affect their world. However, they limited it in such a way that I didn't really even think about it. It was just something that I was like, oh, it would have been cool to see more of.
And now rolling into Mike, Dustin, Lucas, and Will. Particularly, obviously, Will kind of gets taken on his, because like he's like the through line journey of the season, so he's kind of on a different path to everyone. Everyone gets built around him. I think that unfortunately Mike got lost in the mix a little bit this season. They kind of attached him so fully to 11 in season 1 that he kind of has to float between things where he's the kind of leader in season 1. So while he's still great, and Finn Wolfhard is just an amazing actor, he's so like gripping to watch, and he's emotionally like really, really strong in all of his scenes. He did kind of float. But that being said, Dustin got way more of a highlight this season, as did Lucas. It was great actually seeing their families, because that's something in season 1 I was like, these guys have families too, but we're only seeing Will and Mike's. I think we can expand on that more. It was great. Like, I thought Dustin's mum was a fantastic character that feeds more into, like, I think they just had a really cool dynamic.
Yeah.
Same as Lucas and his sister. But seeing them kind of grow and expand on their own journeys, that even though like Lucas didn't really add up to anything in the end, I think his journey with Max, the new character, was a really, really interesting one for him to go down, because considering he's such a great actor, I love the way he expresses so much with his hands. I don't know what many of you guys have noticed that. He's got really, really expressive hands. Just entertaining to watch, and it felt like a really, really nice progression for the character, especially when you stack it up to, I think, after the climax and we have that kind of finale, those last 20 minutes, which we'll talk about later on. I think that really, really worked.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think what the Duffer Brothers did here as well is they honed in on not just like the characters that they've already created, but the actors and how the actors function, especially the kid actors here, and how they function, in real life. And they kind of use that to their own advantage and kind of grew their character more so around them. So, especially in particular, Dustin here, just, you know, he was so good in every single scene, because
such a likable person.
It just felt so realistic as well.
And then if we look at the additional kind of characters that were added into that kind of grouping of the kids and the teenagers first, we have Billy and Max. And while I don't think Billy's impact on the season was as strong as it could be, and I'd love to see more of him, the actor actually studied at the same university as we did and graduated, and obviously he was in Power Rangers earlier this year. I would love to see more of him, because we only got kind of a taste of what makes him tick, even though I felt like that was slightly bizarre, because you have like dads back then were a little bit more assertive anyway, so I don't know if it fully explained why he's so over the top. But I would love to see more of his character, because obviously with Steve no longer being kind of the bully, the badass, the nasty human being, they had to fill that role. So Billy does work, but I do want to see more of him in the future.
Yeah, for sure. And Dacre Montgomery absolutely killed it here in the role as well. Like, I know he was magnetic every time he was on screen. He was stealing scenes, and yeah, as much as he had a really arsehole sort of character, and it was very two-dimensional, I think there's a lot they can really play with moving into future seasons. And Max was an incredible addition as well. I really enjoyed kind of everything that she added. However, she definitely did feel like just an addition.
Yeah,
they kind of
rounding out the gang, I guess.
They kind of build up this story behind her and Billy the whole time. Then it kind of didn't really, I don't know, it didn't really kind of make complete sense when they tried to explain it with the father situation. And so, I don't know, like, I really enjoyed Max, and I think they've still got a lot of potential there. But I think it was just a great addition.
I think she kind of ended up getting tied a bit too much to Lucas's stories, ending up making that a love story rather than her having any massive impact on the events going on in Hawkins at all. So I'd love to see her grow and develop further in the coming seasons, because she was definitely a great addition. I just think there's a lot more that she can do. Now if we go to Joyce and Bob, which was a really really interesting thing, because I think for a lot of us, after season 1, we just wanted Joyce to have a win. She's got her son back, there's still problems there, but she's met this great guy, Bob, played by Sean Astin, which is Sam from The Lord of the Rings. Obviously he's in the Goonies as well, way back, so it was great to see him pop up in another kind of 80s nostalgia type thing like this. He was definitely one of the most likable additions of the season. I really loved his character. He's such a sincere performer. He's so incredibly likable. He just kind of fit into this role amazingly. And I think what really worked as well was the fact that it would have been quite easy to make Joyce, like, she's going to attach herself to anyone right now just because she's kind of this person who's been desperate and kind of sidelined and outcast for so long that any person comes along. And you kind of get that sense at the beginning with Bob. You're like, is this really the kind of guy she'd go for? But he's just so sincere that it worked. And seeing him kind of make big decisions in the second last episode and being that person who was able to go and be Bob the Brain and go and sort out getting power back to the Hawkins facility was fantastic. But his death was terrible.
Outright shocking, and it was utterly frustrating. I mean, from the get-go...
Because it was writing dumb decisions into a character who's just been told how smart they are, like...
And it wasn't even writing kind of decisions that was like, oh, this is kind of, you know, this is a bit nostalgic because, you know, they used to do this in the 80s where someone makes a stupid decision, but it was like, he outright forgot the gun, and I was kind of like, okay, that's the last straw. I really hope they don't do anything else. And then
as soon as he forgot the gun, you knew something was coming.
And then he walks out that door, and then he's just standing there, and he's like, oh, I'm just catching my breath. I'm like, dude, you have...
Catch your breath outside, buddy.
You have these mental rabid dog zombie
How
things
did no one
chasing
else
you?
notice the demi-dog, like, run in? That's what I don't understand. Like, that's actually just bad writing. And while I think killing off his character made for a really effective thing, and actually I think it adds to bringing Hopper and Joyce closer together, because I think there's definitely a relationship that's going to blossom much more there in the future, and I think that's really well done. The way the season ended with the two of them together was really fantastic, but I do think it was like, I felt like Bob could have gone down in a much more like kind of Blaze of Glory like type like way. It was kind of just like, oh, and now he's gone. I'm not saying the death itself was handled poorly, but just the lead up to it was very contrived, which is ironic because there was the scene that people have talked about this season with Lucas describing the events of season 1 to Max and saying, you know, she's like, oh, you know, it's a little bit contrived, a little bit, you know, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, I actually don't think season 1 was like that at all. I think season 2 was the much more contrived one, where you have writers sitting in a room and they want stuff to happen. They need to write ways of getting things to happen, and it doesn't happen organically because the ideas don't flow. So I think while like this stuff didn't necessarily detract from the season, like from the entertainment value, it does definitely detract from like a critical level when you're analysing stuff that just could have been way better. It could have been amazing, but I'm glad they've had these growing pains because they learn from them.
Yeah, for sure, and it detracts kind of from the in-the-moment emotions as well of the scenes, like, you know, seeing those characters that you love die, or seeing those characters kind of be in a situation and then you're kind of distracted by something else.
Because you're thinking as opposed to emoting. Like usually when it's an emotional response, it's like involuntary, whereas you've got to like try to think things through. You're like, wait, that's weird.
And we do understand as well that not everyone's obviously going to watch the show like this. You know, most people will not watch the show like this at all, but we do, and then we're just here to express that because, you know, not everything is perfect, and it's okay to be not perfect.
And looking at not perfect, while I think they're probably, aside from Steve now, my favourite characters, Jim and Eleven's story this season was really kind of hit and miss. There was some great moments shared between them. Obviously, Hopper is kind of sheltering Eleven. She's come straight back through from the Upside Down. She ended up straight back into the real world. I was like, okay, I wish marketing hadn't have shown that, because how much better would it have been if we hadn't have known. And they're like making a moment out of it at the end of the first episode. They're like, oh, she's back. I'm like, your marketing showed it. That's a waste of an entire climax of an episode. But that being said, their dynamic was fantastic. I do wish it had been taken further with the whole thing of like, Jim has lost his daughter and he's currently using Eleven as a surrogate. And that wasn't really kind of handled as well as I think. I think internally the actors were definitely thinking that, but I don't think it was expressed particularly well to us as the audience. I don't think. I think there could have been a lot more kind of, I mean, Eleven didn't even know about the daughter until like the last episode, and I think that you could have ended up with some really great scenes. Almost for anyone who's played the game The Last of Us, there's an interesting relationship like that in the film. There's a couple of scenes where it boils over and stuff about a missing daughter and a dead daughter gets brought up, and it really creates a brilliantly electric dynamic between the characters in those moments, and I think it could have got there. I think a lot of it did work, but a lot of it kind of, you didn't.
Yeah, I think it was just kind of unfortunate because they had it there. They had the groundwork to create something absolutely phenomenally, emotionally crushing, but it just kind of didn't quite get there. However, they've still got it there,
yeah,
and they can still, you know, achieve it in later seasons as well. Although, I must say, I really did enjoy the dynamic between the two of them.
Yeah.
It was great to see them team up, and especially those earlier few episodes as well, kind of seeing Millie Bobby Brown as 11 kind of being really conflicted about, you know, can she go outside or not? I thought they played that really quite well, and she was absolutely fantastic.
She missed Mike, and that was great.
Yeah, and you know, she is just ridiculously good. She's such an incredible talent, and it is so great to see her, and in my opinion, the other, you know, best actor in the show, of David Harbour, go kind of like, you know, right up against each other. Especially those scenes where they're both yelling and everything was exploding. That was just fantastic to watch.
It did feel though that like 11 was kind of the most like strung along character of this season. I think they could have almost approached it differently, so she showed up in just the final episode without any of that context around what had been happening to her character. She could have shown up in the final episode, and then season 3 can deal with how she got there with a flashback episode that's entirely dedicated to her, that shows that process, rather than the flashback, not the flashback, but the like a side episode, episode 7 that we got. That would have been much more effective, finding out in season 3 how she got there, with the entire premiere perhaps dedicated to showing that before we roll into the actual story. We've seen that done in other shows where it's worked brilliantly, but what they did here almost felt like an episode that was setting up a spin-off of the show. It's like, hey, there's other people out there with powers. The entire that episode, I feel like by all means could work. A lot of our favorite shows, such as The Leftovers, like absolutely rely on those kind of bottle episodes where it's just one character focusing on them. But the problem was that while 11 was going through stuff that was really important to her character growth, it didn't actually contribute to the overarching story. And when things picked up the momentum of seeing the demidogs coming out of the ground in the previous episode, and then taking a break like that doesn't actually feed back into the story of the episode in any way. I understand splitting it for the tension, you go up and over like that, but rather than the tension going kind of powering through it, it just kind of hopped. And we had this limbo over episode 7 before we pick back up in the 8th episode. And I think like the characters as well, they were like, hey, we're all outcasts, you've got to like us. Whereas I think in season 1, Jonathan and Barb were set up as being those outcast characters. They were actually had time dedicated to showing how and why by putting them in social situations, rather than keeping this kind of team of, I don't know what you want to call them, but those team of misfits, just having them in a room talking about how they're a team of outcast misfits just doesn't really cut it for me.
And I think for me, the most frustrating part of that episode 7 was just like the fact that they had so much potential there to create something really quite special, but it just never really got there. And I think, you know, it even came down to like the motivations of the characters. So the sister, Carly, the fact that like she was hunting down all these other people, and she was just like, I'm chasing down these people, I'm killing them, and this is what I'm doing. And it's like, okay, so that's all you're doing? How are you surviving? How are you getting money? Why are other people kind of like following you like this ultimate leader? I get she's kind of got these powers, but at the same time, she's literally just going down hunting people that, you know, she's just seeking revenge. I just didn't really believe the motivation, and it wasn't put across in a way that became really that believable. And then in the end, when 11 ends up leaving them, it kind of made sense, because it was like, yeah, this chick's kind of fucking nuts. She's just going around killing people. 11 doesn't want to do that. So I don't know, if 11 doesn't believe it, then why as an audience member should I really believe it? I didn't really feel the conflict at the end of the episode for her to go, do I go back to my town or do I stay with these people? However though, I did really enjoy the kind of, the theme of 11 finding a home this season. Her trying, you know, going to her mother's house and being like, this is now your home, going to Carly and being like, this is now your home, or going back to town and being like, that's your home. I really did enjoy that kind of aspect, her trying to find that. But again, it just didn't really kind of get there.
Well, that being said, I don't think there was, for me, there was never any conflict, was that Hawkins is her home with either Hopper or Joyce or with Mike's family. She's got a home there. So for me, that conflict was kind of voided from the beginning, because it was more like a home until I'm able to go back. The stuff with her mother was interesting as well. It's interesting knowing that Matthew Modine's Brenner is going to be back, considering his death in season 1 was so completely awful. His character was always underwritten for me, and considering I've loved the characters of the show. I know you're not supposed to like a villain. I'm not saying I want to like him, but he was actually really underdeveloped in the first season, so I want to see him coming back as a continuous threat. I think the story overall, like the mystery, the setup, I think the mystery part of it, as opposed to once we kicked into high action gear during the second half of the season, was much better. The first 4 episodes were, I think, a lot stronger because they kind of were just exploring the world, and it was kind of, what amazed me was how much work has been done in season 1 that we were just able to sink in and just kind of cop it. Like, most people would hate any show that goes and just does, like, shows what characters are doing in their daily lives. Most people watch it and go, oh, boring. But I think it's a testament to how good this show set up its first season, how good its characters are, that people who aren't used to watching character-driven TV can watch those first 4 episodes like that and be like, no, they're great. So I think that's really, really impressive on the creators of the show, the writers and everyone involved, that they're actually able to make stuff that most people usually dismiss as like kind of the height of the entertainment of the season.
And I think something that's really, really impressive here as well, that I kind of like clicked on more so with this season, is the fact that yes, you know, there's 80s nostalgia, and yes, it's set in the 80s, and it's all about the 80s, but this is still very much a modern 2017 TV show. It's written in the now, and yeah, it's written for back then, but like all the characters seem very modern. They don't seem completely 80s, and what I like about that is it allows us to kind of connect as audience members who, you know, for me, I didn't live through the 80s. I can kind of understand this nostalgia, and I can see it and I can appreciate it, but I can also completely and heavily relate to these characters because so much what they're going through is so very modern.
Now, if I do want to talk about what I absolutely loved, was the actual final 20 minutes of the season. While I thought the entire, you know, closing the gate and whatnot was a little bit underwhelming because of the show's inability to kind of dramatically and emotionally peak in scenes like that, it will get there eventually. They've just got to kind of test the waters until they understand how to make it work. In the same way that Spielberg, who's the person they're kind of drawing from, is so capable of doing consistently. I do think the kind of the snowball at the end was just fantastically done. It finally gave me all the moments of development in the season that I've been waiting for seeing. It was so great seeing, you know, like Dustin getting all these influences from the people around him, and that moment that he shared with Nancy when they were dancing was just fantastic. It shows like how likable all the characters are, and I think what has always been the thing about this show, and what really makes me love it despite all these flaws that we are talking about, is the fact that it is just good people trying to do the right thing, trying to do the good thing, and that is everyone in this show. Literally, like even Dr. Owens, who is running Hawkins' facility this season, is a good guy. He's not a bad guy like Brenner was. I think that is really beautiful, and watching the moments shared between Eleven and Mike, between Max and Lucas, between Dustin and Nancy, just everything this season, finally even seeing like Jonathan and Nancy hook up, which I think was the way we always thought that was going to go. Well, I think some parts of that scene, having it being in that dude's house, was a bit weird and a bit iffy. It was really, really well handled, and I just think, yeah, that entire kind of final scene was just beautifully done and emotionally really riveting, because what it felt like was like, this could be the ending of the show. That type of setting with that type of occasion, the characters in those states, this big boss has kind of just been like, he's been eliminated for now, they've closed the gate, it's all over. It actually felt like the show could have ended there and been completely emotionally satisfying.
And of course, technicals here, I mean, the show is just absolutely stunning. In particular, the 3rd and the 4th episode were freaking beautiful, and we only just found out as well, it was actually done by the cinematographer who's done 21 episodes of Mr. Robot, so it makes sense why it looks so good. I mean, in particular, the ending of episode 4 had my favorite shot of probably the show, where we had Hopper go down into like the vines, and the camera just came back, and it twisted, and it went completely upside down, and it was just a perfect moment. It was a perfect way to end that episode, and it was just stunning. And again, you know, the night lighting here through the entire show is so freaking impressive.
Really beautiful.
The fact that we can just see so much all the time, so clearly, but also retain its style.
And atmosphere as well. It's just really, really tricky to do. There was also the fog scene at the scrapyard with the Demodogs attacking with Steve and the kids all there. It was really, really beautifully shot as well. It was just a really, really beautifully shot season in general. In terms of the editing, in the first season we had issues with the pacing. I think the pacing was very much kind of like, I'm not talking about the pacing of the show because that was excellent, but the pacing of like conversational editing, that was fixed this season. The only problem was that they fixed the conversational pacing, but the continuity of the actors facing this way as they're talking, and when you cut to them, they're facing this way, and then that became quite distracting for both of us. I think a lot of people won't notice, but it was very apparent to us.
Yeah, it was irritating, especially in really heavily emotional scenes, especially with Will, because Will was fantastic this season, gave an incredible performance. However, in between takes, especially when it was Will and his mother, like, you know, he'd be, you know, completely emotional, and then all of a sudden you'd cut to Winona Ryder and you can see him being like super chill in the foreground. I was like, that's annoying me. And then they cut back to him and he's being emotional again. I know, you know, not everyone's going to pick up on that, and it doesn't really subtract from the scenes that much, but it's there, it's noticeable, and it's a thing that can be fixed.
And the soundtrack again was excellent. The fact that they used the kids theme in the very first episode as things got kicked off, I really loved that. That actually gave me a really kind of emotional connection. I think in general the music does a really good job of emotionally connecting me, at least on the surface level. I mean, this is a really kind of surface level show. You can kind of dig into stuff about themes about family and communication and whatnot, but it's not going out of its way to make the statements. It's just there to entertain you with great characters trying to do the right thing. The music, as always, aids that, as does pretty much everything else in the show. As much as we do have a lot more kind of gripes with this season, it's easily a season of TV that I'd watch again. It's the type of show that, even though I've only just watched the entire thing in the last 2 weeks, I've just been recommending it to pretty much everyone because it is just such a fantastic kind of experience.
And I think that's because of the love that the Duffer Brothers have for filmmaking and telling these stories as well. And I mean, these guys, you know, that they've improved again their direction. You watch the first 2 episodes and the last episode of this season compared to what they did in the first season. They're improving. They're still taking risks. And I love that. I love that, you know, these guys are still learning, and they're, you know, happy to not just settle down. They're happy to go, okay, well, let's try this time. It might not work, but, you know, something else might work here.
I mean, episode 7 didn't work, but I'm actually glad from a creative standpoint that they did it. No one's gonna go, I'm not watching the show anymore because I didn't like episode 7. I'm glad they took that risk, because you don't learn what works unless you do that. And the best shows for us, the shows that we talk about all the time that are super memorable, are the ones that never were like, okay, this is what we're doing from now on every single episode, every single season. They continually tried new things. And yes, they were just lucky enough to have those things work. But I think the fact that Stranger Things is still experimenting, it hasn't fallen into a groove, it hasn't fallen into a rut, it hasn't shut down completely, it is still just continuing to work and vibe with itself until it finds the right things to do. We've got so much space for it to grow. I think that is just a fantastic thing. Fantastic season. Gripes aside, super entertaining. I'm probably going to watch it again.
So that was our very heavy and extensive thoughts on Stranger Things 2. What did you think though? Let us know in the comment section below.
And way down, that's probably worth hitting our subscribe button to see more stuff from us.
And don't forget to check us out on Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat and Twitter, all at Breaking Banter.